Julius Jewell is the co-founder of the fashion brand Heliot Emil. Heliot Emil has been recognized as one of the most successful up-and-coming brands in recent years. In a couple of years, Julius and his brother turned the Heliot Emil brand into an international success story. And all of this before they turned 30 years old. They went from making clothes in a small studio by themselves to being stocked in over 100 stores worldwide. The following is a short clip from our conversation together for the Beyond Fashion Business podcast. Let's dive straight into the difficult questions. I guess my first question would be, what do you think of fashion today? The good and the bad.
Wow.
What are the first thoughts when you hear that question? What are the first thoughts that come into your mind? And again, the good ones and the bad ones.
It's an interesting question because what is fashion? Like what encompasses fashion? Are we talking about clothes? Are we talking about, is fast fashion included in fashion? Is fashion only the art? Is fashion the commercial and the art combined? Where do you draw the lines? I've always, been a bit both fascinated, irritated, motivated by that there is very few definitions in this world where we're all competing, because at some level we're competing with everyone. We're competing with everyone from Zara to Chanel in terms of putting clothes on people's bodies, right? So that's like the basic of what clothes does. That's like the basic of the functionality, the solution that we are trying to solve. But then you dive deeper into it and you say, okay, fashion is also something that's putting a tone of voice into the world. It's also something that's creating some kind of medium where people can express themselves. And here you take a few out of that big bunch, but there might still be people that believe that certain things are also worth considering in this matrix, right? And where do you draw the lines? So yeah, I think fashion is in an interesting spot where everyone's competing on the same playing field and completely different playing fields.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's both interesting and also sometimes sad to see that you have something like Shine or Shein or whatever you want to call it completely taking over because they can keep the prices so low. And you have, the fast fashion industry just growing and growing and growing. And it's sad to see that that's like a big part of fashion, but you also just have to realize that, there is also that part to fashion, and you have to understand what is your role then? How do you stand in contrast to that and educate people and make people understand that there is something bigger to fashion than just, putting clothes on people's bodies.
Interesting. And what's your own relationship with the industry and with all the facets that it encompasses?
I'm a
What's
positive
your
minded
role,
person.
essentially? Hmm.
I try to look at it as, we're trying to bring something new to the table. We're trying to look at what's happening in other industries and then applying some of these things that are happening in other industries to the fashion industry and seeing if there is some kind of combination or at least just an extension or an education that we can provide within that. I mean, it all sounds extremely highbrow, but basically just looking at what advancements are happening and not looking backwards, but looking forwards and saying how does something like AI fit into the landscape of fashion? How does something like 3D printing fit into the landscape of fashion? How does something like sustainability or material innovation, or how does all of these things, how do they fit into the landscape of both providing an artistic expression, something interesting, and also something that, like makes sense. So is like looking towards a future where, yeah, where things make sense.
Interesting. So it's a question of how can we add something you need creatively, or how can we add value creatively, but also how can we add value to the industry as a whole as an evolving business and evolving brand.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, again, it sounds like we're on this, extremely sort of like highbrow mission of like
Spiritual pursuit.
revolutionary, yeah, spiritual pursuit of something. But really, it's just about, like thinking outside the box and
Right. Just
not
creating cool
just like,
things.
yeah, like creating cool things, creating things that are interesting for people, and through that, trying to educate people about, like maybe it's worth investing into a piece that is both design wise more interesting than what your counterpart is, but also maybe has some other facets like a sustainable perspective, or like is inspired by something that can create a bit more of like an emotional connection or something like that, more than just like solving the solution of putting clothes on the body.
Right. I understand. And how has this relationship with the industry evolved over your career? Because obviously now you have a lot more experience. It's changed, right? So how would you describe it to how you had it when you were starting out versus now mainly? What were the biggest differences?
Uh, that's a good question. I think I've grown a bit more confident in that this is a a role that's important. That it is something that people want. And before maybe having a little bit to rely on existing ideas that people already had, that
Mm,
you would be relevant. So saying like, I'm only relevant if I can make myself uh, comparable to the already existing. So like if they are making a shirt, I should equally make a shirt, but I can't make it too different than what's already out there. And not having the confidence to say like I'm just gonna, like do it how I feel, and that should be the concept. Or if I believe strongly in like material or technique or something or silhouette or something, then
mm.
that should be enough. And I think like I've always had very stark confidence in the way that I would express the things that I do. So through the campaigns and like the storytelling and those things, because that's the background that I come from. So here is like something where I feel confident enough to express it how I want. And I think a lot of people started in the beginning to resonate with that storytelling, but then now also having confidence in the product and having confidence in that, like what we're doing is the right thing, and not having to rely on what's already created and creating like a comparable product to that. Does
Understood.
that make sense?
Understood. Of course, yeah. So confidence in your vision and how that vision is made up of by different parts of the industry, right? How that vision is what that vision is made up of creatively, what that vision is made up of in terms of products and categories, what that vision is made up in terms of communications, what the vision is made up of in terms of business model, even. So
Yeah.
the confidence that you've had to through probably reinforced success over long periods of time has continuously pushed you to do things that are a lot less influenced by the industry as a whole, and maybe by even the consumers as a whole, just mainly by what you want to create.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think that, like that's also why it's like a lot of the time people have thought that we were much bigger than we actually were in the beginning. Like in the beginning it was just Victor and me doing, like everything. And people thought it was this big thing because we had this image and we had this like confidence in the way that we presented the things, but the actual things that were behind or maybe not, like up to the standard of how we communicated them. And like things like doing shows and, like things like those kind of things are what pushes people to think that, oh, these guys are comparable to, XYZ, like, and then if you don't live up to that image, then immediately, like people lose faith in you. And that's something that, like we've had to catch up, I think. And now having the actual product, it's more difficult to then sort of like make people understand that, okay, now we actually have both the image and the product, and like the things that we do are up to the standard, and if not beyond the standard of like what we are showing. So I think, like it's been an interesting process. It's been an interesting journey. Yeah, I don't know if it's like making sense what I'm saying. Like I'm picturing it in my head, and maybe it's sounding like a bit more
No, I get
complicated
it.
than it.
I get it.
Like
So
yeah,
it's when you were very early on, I mean, the perception of the brand was very high relative to what was actually going on from, we'll call it product perspective, but when we say product perspective, it's everything that happens from from infrastructure, right? Production, product, management, all of those different things. And obviously, because I think it's a couple of things, because early on you had your experience in communications, the communications was really good, but maybe the infrastructure and the product weren't as good relative to how good the communications was. And as you've evolved, you've sort of like made the transition, right? The transition where, communications and perception is important, but really if you have a good product, communication kind of takes care of itself. And when you have good product, you stop having to play by the industry's rules. You can sort of like create them on your own because you already have a brand, a reputation, and customers that deeply resonate with it.
exactly that. Yeah, yeah. So thankfully, the what I said wasn't too complicated. But yeah, you explained it way better. But yeah, that's what I was trying to say.